From the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis, this is Indiana Issues. Here's your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz.
Hello, and welcome to Indiana Issues, the public affairs program where we go beyond the headlines and sound bites and bring you Indiana's news and political newsmakers in their entirety. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, coming to you from the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis. Well, in this last edition of Indiana Issues Television for 2022, we look at the governor's race, we look at the state budget, and also look at the 2023 session to see what's coming up. And our guests today are Bartlett, Republican, Lara Beck, Democrat, and Libertarian, Mark Rutherford. So, Mark, Laura, always good to have you folks here. Let's go ahead and get started. There are now three candidates in the race for governor. Just this past week, as we record this program, U.S. Senator Mike Braun and Lieutenant Governor Suzanne Crouch both announced they are running, and they joined former Mike Pence IEDC Director Eric Doden. And for the record, the 2024 election is still just almost 2 years away. So, Mark, let me start with you. Is it too early to be announcing yet?
Boy, back in the old days, it wouldn't happen like this, but it now seems like everybody has extra money and extra edge and extra competition and wants to get the, for lack of a better word, the edge on it. I think that when they announce this early, I mean, you can do an exploratory committee, you can start raising money, do the insider stuff, get people excited there, but sometimes I think it burns out the public. So I'm not so sure that it's a good idea to announce this early.
Oh, Laura, your thoughts? Too early for announcements yet, or?
Well, actually, it's funny. I agree with Mark. I mean, I do think the public is burned out, and I think you run the risk of burning them out. But from a practical standpoint, it is early because they cannot fundraise during the legislative session. So they've essentially hamstrung themselves because they won't be able to do it because it's a budget session. So maybe they're going to be doing earned media. Maybe they'll be raising, I just don't necessarily know what it was unless it was just internally to see who could get out of the gate quicker, because what ends up happening is you just kind of spin your wheels, especially if you can't fundraise.
Barrett, Republican, joining us on the program. Welcome to Indiana Issues. Always good to have you here as part of our Indiana Issues panel family. Your thoughts on the governor's race, too early to be announcing?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Abdul. It's an interesting situation in this race because we saw Eric Doden come out very early with his announcement. If I'm not mistaken, he's announced like well over 6 months ago. So we had that factor in. And then we also have the element of the fact that Eric Doden and Mike Braun can both largely self-fund. They're both going to fundraise for sure, but they are two people that can do a lot on their own. Lieutenant Governor Crouch is a supreme fundraiser, but like Laura pointed out, she's not able to do that during the legislative session. So I think one of the things that impacted the timing here was the early announcement by Doden, and then the fact that two of these three are self-funders. So I think it's very early, but I think that's probably a couple of the reasons why.
Mark, let me switch back over to you real quick. Is there a front runner in this race yet on the Republican side, or once again, is it just everybody's just sort of out of the gate right now, or doing sort of the parade walk before the race starts?
Well, I think they're doing the parade walk. I mean, Braun gets a lot of interest because he can self-fund quite a bit. He's very, very, very wealthy, and is a sitting U.S. senator. Crouch, being the sitting lieutenant governor, that gives her a lot. But I wouldn't say there's a front runner yet. I've seen too many races where the so-called front runner isn't by election day. Let's just see what happens, who's going to go in. Laura makes a good point about the legislative prohibition. It actually favors the self-funders. It's an interesting problem that people have who are running for statewide office.
Laura, let me ask you this, change gears a little bit. What about the Democrats? Obviously, we've been hearing names, Jennifer McCormick, possibly running for governor. I heard she's put together sort of an informal team, putting together an exploratory committee to run for governor down the road. Who will the Democrats pick, or who's on the Democrats short list?
Well, I think we're going to see a number of different people putting their hat in the ring. That would not surprise me at all. I also think that, yes, Dr. McCormick has certainly expressed, at least on Twitter, and I know she's out there and pushing her issues forward. But yeah, I think we're going to see that coming. I just don't think there's going to be this sort of sense of urgency to be on the Republicans' timetable, because remember, they've got this primary, and their primary is going to be pretty intense. And when you look at the fact that you've got a sitting U.S. senator, you've got the lieutenant governor, you've got a lot of folks who are going to be in this primary, and it's going to be incredibly competitive, and people are going to be watching it. So for the Democrats, I don't think we necessarily need to be on their timeline that the Republicans are on.
Allie, how competitive do you think this primary will be? You've got three folks in, like I said, Mike Braun, Suzanne Crouch, Eric Doden, all have conservative credentials, so there's not a whole lot of daylight between them. How do you expect competitive or to be brutally honest, messy, do you think this primary will be, or is it still too early to tell right now?
I think it's too early to tell for sure, because I think we need to wait and see if any others get into the race, but it's going to be a tough primary. I think we're going to see a lot along the lines of what we saw at the last Republican convention, whether or not affiliation with current Governor Holcomb comes into play. That was a big issue at the Republican convention. And past experiences are just going to be analyzed for all three of these people, because they all have public service in their background. So there's a lot to nitpick there. There's a lot to look at on the resumes. And so I think just by virtue of who these people are, it will become probably pretty intense.
Laura, let me get your thoughts.
Yeah, actually, what I was going to echo Mark's comment as well as Allie's comment, but I think when you come out this early, a lot can change and a lot can happen. And I was just thinking about in 2003 when Governor O'Bannon passed away. Mitch Daniels had no idea when he got to the race that he'd be running against Joe Kernan. He thought he was going to be running against different candidates. And then you look at 2016, when John Gregg got to the race, he didn't think he'd be running against Eric Holcomb. So I think if you look at past history, a lot can happen in that time frame, which again is one of the reasons why getting out there so early may not always serve you that well.
Mark, let me get your thoughts here, because obviously Libertarians are a political party here in Indiana. Are they worried about the governor's race yet, or possibly looking for candidates, or?
Oh, we always are. But right now, lots of people are going to our candidate in 2020, Don Rainwater, and asking him to run. So there's a lot of pressure being put on there out there for that, because we got second place in a third of the counties, roughly. So, that's a pretty good showing for Libertarians, and why a lot of people would like to see him run again. But it's still pretty early. Our convention is usually in March. Usually it'll be in 2024. And we have a pretty open system. We might have 3 or 4 candidates, despite if Don decides to run and throw his hat in there. There'll be several good people, and it will be. We usually have contended governor nomination races. So, and Libertarian's a convention party for governor, so we're not in the primary yet.
You're watching Indiana Issues. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org, talking Indiana politics on this last show of 2022. Our guests on the program today are Libertarian Mark Rutherford, Democrat Lara Beck, and a newcomer to our program, Republican Bartlett. My friends, moving to our next topic, with Mike Braun now filing for the governor's race, that leaves his U.S. Senate seat open. Jim Banks has expressed some interest in running. Victoria Spartz has expressed some interest in running. And if they run, then that opens up their seats for congressional candidates. Then you have a state rep or state senator. They may be running as well. So once again, Mark, we'll start with you. Is it still too early?
Oh, I still think it's too early. You've got the burnout problem. You've got all types of things like that. There's a lot you can do behind the scenes to get prepared to do it that doesn't burn out the public, doesn't waste your time, doesn't waste your resources, that don't burn out your volunteers. You look at the British system, they've got laws that kind of pigeonhole it, but they kind of get it done in 90 days. And it seems to work for them just fine. Our way we do it works in many ways just fine, but that seems like a long time to have to be hearing who's going to be running for U.S. Senate.
Allie, let me ask you, what do you think happens, if Jim Banks and Victoria Spartz decide to run? My running joke is anybody who's not running for either one of those seats take one step forward.
Yeah, it's like we kind of phrased it in the question. It's gonna be a game of dominoes, it seems like. So, now that Senate seat's up, we may have interest from two members of Congress, and then what happens with those seats? I think it's really going to be a domino effect down the line. And yes, it is still very early, especially for that race. So like the lower down, the ballot we get, we're going to see this domino effect with all of the early, people announcing, because at the top started early. And so I think Mark is right. We could see some burnout on this, and it probably, I think people are wise to hold off on at least an official announcement until things settle a bit on the upper levels.
Laura, obviously, when we talk about one person leaving one seat and that seat opens up, another seat opens up, a lot of folks will say it's political dominoes, but I also argue it also has the potential to be political Jenga.
I totally agree with you. I'm more on the side of it being political Jenga, because it could just get so messy, especially when you look at the party infrastructure, and some of those party folks have been put in by some of the people who will be leaving offices or going up for something else. So yeah, it can get pretty messy, especially in a primary. I think the other piece too, when we talk about coming out early, the one exception in my mind to that is Congress, because I feel like with Congress, it is such a sprint all the time, especially in terms of the media, the money, the messaging, and the grassroots, because they're up every other year. And those districts are just, it's a grind, and it can be really grueling. So for Congress, I do think that it is important to get yourself out there sooner rather than later. There's always, though, conventional wisdom that you want to wait until after the midterms to make, not the midterms, after the municipal elections to make an announcement, because you can actually take away from fundraising dollars from those folks. So that's something, at least within the party structure, that you may see people holding back for that reason, and not making announcements too early. But I don't ever think, especially when it comes to Congress, that you can be too early.
Mark, let me ask you, are we sitting on potentially with the governor's race and with the U.S. Senate and all these other congressional races, a very, very messy Indiana primary system?
Oh yeah, it's a very messy Indiana primary system, and it confuses voters. I'm a big fan of the concept of rational ignorance. Most voters pay just enough attention to get by because they're more concerned about paying their mortgage and sending their kids to schooling after high school, be a trade school or a college. And that makes sense to ignore this stuff, just trying to get that done. And so if you have a primary system that's very confusing, lots of people running, I think it helps confuse the voters. I mean, I'm a big advocate of the convention system. I'm also a big advocate of having more easier ballot access. I believe that if you have several candidates out there from different parties, you have a lot. That solves the problem of in a lot of ways of having just a couple of people in the primaries, and it solves the problem of the primaries burn people out, the voter out. I'm more concerned about the voters and they having the opportunity to make a rational decision despite their irrational life.
Alan, let me ask you this, because Mark brings up an interesting point, and so does Laura, with respect to our primary system. Is it time to maybe change it? Maybe go to either an open primary where Democrats and Republicans can sort of pick the top two, then they meet in the runoff, or perhaps do what they do in Alaska or Maine, which is ranked choice voting?
Gosh, I've been thinking a lot about this lately, as we've seen different hotly contested races throughout the entire country. I don't think I'm ready to say yet that I think going to a different system makes the most sense in Indiana, but I do agree that the primary field being number one, crowded, people coming out early, and the way it operates, it is confusing. So do I think we need to do a better job maybe of trying to streamline education on how it works? Probably. I'm not ready to say that I think our system should be drastically changed to a runoff or ranked choice voting system at this point. But I think, especially on the Republican side in a state like Indiana, we also risk, turning people in the party against each other. And we've seen a little bit of that type of infighting, which I hope, in the next upcoming cycle, we can avoid more. And so I think, just working on tailoring the primary system, getting out the vote is really where we need to be at this point.
Laura, let me get your thoughts real quick before we take our break. Ranked choice, runoff, or keep the primary system as it is?
Well, I mean, I think regardless of what we do, I mean, this is going to sound terrible, but in the political class, the more candidates you have, the more consultants, the more people are employed throughout that process. So, I mean, there may be those folks making money as opposed to, the voters may get tired of it, but it will be lucrative for a number of folks out there.
All right. Well, our guests in the program today are Libertarian Mark Rutherford, Democrat Lara Beck, and Republican Bartlett. We're going to take ourselves a quick break. We come back, the state budget forecast. We see what the revenue numbers are going to look like for next year, and also the 2023 legislative session. You're watching Indiana Issues from the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Indiana Issues. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim, the editor and publisher of IndianaPolitics.org. We're coming to you from the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis. Our guests in the program today are Libertarian Mark Rutherford, Democrat Lara Beck, and Republican Bartlett. All right, guys, although the latest state revenue numbers show the budget growth, and lawmakers are saying, you know what, they've got some curveballs and some speed bumps in the way, and they're concerned. For example, $700 million are what agencies are requesting, but the state only has like $600 million extra dollars in new revenue. That doesn't even count K-12 education, other funding programs as well. And also lawmakers saying they're concerned about the economy, what a slight recession might do. So, Mark, let me start with you. What should lawmakers do with respect to the budget?
Well, they're going to do what they always do, which I find in the Indiana General Assembly, an awful lot of legislators listen to you. An awful lot of them who are smart don't overpromise. My understanding is about $700 million in requests, $600 million they think will be available. So you're going to have to make cuts. One thing that is happening because of money that came in from the federal government, from other sources during the pandemic, there was extra money out there, and some, I think, agencies got used to it and they want to keep it, which is only a natural thing to do. But there are going to have to be some tough decisions made here. And we also are having huge inflationary impact, especially among salaries. And everybody's dealing with that, the judiciary, legislative, and executive, because people are moving around because they can get paid more elsewhere. And the state government is, interesting enough, doing a pretty good job keeping pace with inflation, but that hurts the budget a lot when it comes to salaries.
Laura, let me ask you, what should be the state's top three priorities as lawmakers get ready to put their budget together with the financial clouds that are on the horizon?
Well, I mean, we talk about this in terms of financial clouds, but we're also leaving out the fact that the state has a massive budget surplus. And I understand that you want to hold that back, absolutely understandable, for a rainy day or for if there's another pandemic or for something like that. But they're sitting on this surplus, and I think that you could be thoughtful and proactive and careful in how you spend those funds. And so when you look at that, I would look at education and school funding. I would look at infrastructure and roads, and I would also look at healthcare. The governor had a panel that put together a comprehensive report on Hoosiers and healthcare. We are 48th in the nation in terms of public health spending, for example. We are not a healthy state, and this is a thorough report. It's a very good roadmap with a lot of great suggestions to get us healthier, because if you have healthier people, you have healthier workers. I also think pre-K would be really incredibly important. We talk about workforce development and the talent pipeline and things like that. If kids start kindergarten behind, they're never going to catch up. And so I really think that those would be some key areas where you could take a little bit of the surplus to put toward that, so we could actually get ourselves on solid footing.
Al, let me ask you, as a Republican, what should be the lawmakers' top three priorities be?
Yeah, I actually don't disagree with Laura's priorities. We could find some disagreement on the details of those priorities, but I do agree, and I believe that the legislature will be focusing very heavily on healthcare costs. I know this has been a priority for the speaker and the president pro tem, a public priority, and so I think that we are going to see a heavy focus from the legislature on healthcare costs and making sure that healthcare is affordable for all Hoosiers. I think the focus on education is always there and will continue to be there. I don't think they're going to make any changes to that as a priority moving forward. Like Laura said, with the workforce development pipeline, making sure that Hoosiers are being educated in Indiana and then finding a job in Indiana. So I would really say that those are going to be two of the very top priorities, probably with healthcare number one.
Mark, let me ask you, particularly about the state surplus. Is it time to dip into it? Because even though it's technically $4 billion in change, we had a conversation earlier this week with Ryan Misher, who said it's actually more about $1.7 billion. If you start giving everybody what they want as far as programs go, what's the old line? Ain't no surplus now, it's gone.
Well, I look at, to me, a budget surplus. You decide what it is, it should be, how much you keep it, and you don't spend it. And I go back to the Depression. That's the emergency that's for. That could happen again. We've been pretty lucky not to have anything that horrible happen since then, although we've had some bad financial times off and on occasionally. But I just remember as a little kid, my parents talking about Arkansas and why are the roads so bad when we travel across the United States? My parents, they love to travel in their vacations by car all over the place. And they'd say because they spent all their money before the Depression and have not had any since then. And that's where the surplus is there, is to get you through that. So that's my bent on it. We've got a lot of money out there. We've got a lot of things that we could do, but you eventually have to pick priorities and just stick to it. What I would prefer to do is or for the state to do, is to keep it where it is, don't spend it, use it for what I consider a true emergency. That's what it's for. If we've got a depression, Texas had the horrible thing with their electronic grid with ice and bad weather. That to me would be a justification to dive into it because there are expenses that aren't anticipated because of extremely bad weather. Same with Louisiana with Katrina, maybe you use some of the money then for that. But you don't do it to fill gaps in it or to give to take more priorities on that you eventually have to draw the line.
Our guests on the program today are Libertarian Mark Rutherford, Democrat Lara Beck, Republican Ally Bartlett. You're watching Indiana Issues. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. Well, my friends, the 2023 session right around the corner. Lawmakers back on January 9th. Lots of things, education, the governor's health care plan. Also, that one issue that usually pops up around Valentine's Day that no one's anticipating that catches us all off guard. And let me start with you. What should lawmakers prioritize when they come back?
Yeah, so I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but I think it's a budget issue and a policy issue, which is healthcare costs and focus on improving our healthcare systems and outcomes in Indiana. I think this is going to be the hot topic of the 2023 session. And again, that's on the budget side and on the policy side. So I think we're going to see a lot of focus on healthcare as we move into 2023. Education is always going to be a hot topic, especially in a budget year, but it's always a policy hot topic too. As far as the social issues go, I really think people have had enough of it. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't hear a ton on that moving forward. So if you had to ask me what the number one issue is going to be in 2023 and what the legislature is practically going to focus on the policy and budget side, it's going to be healthcare.
Laura, what do you think lawmakers should make a priority?
Well, I think education definitely, and I think pre-K. I think, after watching my son have the arc of now he's in high school and watching, him having pre-K and going all the way through, I really think that is something that's critically important. We know it works, but for whatever reason, the legislature just won't do it. Another piece I do think is really going to be important is the healthcare piece, and I also think though that if they get to a point where it delves into social issues, I think they're going to lose people. But I think it will. I mean, I just don't, and I just can't see them having control of the supermajorities in such a way to push back a social issue, sort of push on that. So I can see that coming out there, but I really would love to see them focus on some healthcare. I'd love to see them focus on roads and some pre-K.
Mark, your thoughts?
Well, I think healthcare is a big deal. I think we all agree on that. We probably have different ideas on how to get there. And one of the things is certificates of needs for hospitals, et cetera. And it's awful hard to start a new hospital right now because the hospital that's 2 counties over will say, well, it's really not needed. And the end result is no one can get to the hospital or to medical care in rural areas. And we have our family farm is in Western Washington County, and I see all over the place that they're losing the hospitals, and that's a problem. That affects healthcare, and that affects people's survival and how to do it. We did very well for a long time getting ambulance services at the townships, et cetera. Now I see that declining. Maybe that's where the money should go, but more importantly, we should get government out of a lot of these things that protect special interests in the healthcare industry, and we need to decentralize it. Centralization doesn't work overall, maybe on a few things, but we need to get a balanced system where healthcare is affordable. It's not, even with all these plans by government and by special interests working together. We need to stop that. The states should start doing that trend. Indiana and the General Assembly should be brave enough to do so.
All right, here's an open-ended question for either three of you, Mark, Laura, Allie. Who should see some form of marijuana legalization next year? Don't everybody jump in all at once.
Oh, I'll jump in. I'll jump in. I mean, I'm pretty radical. You decriminalize it and you tax it. We have a long history. That's a good way to make taxes. More people can rationalize it. Even the people who don't like taxes can say, well, that's a better thing to tax than a lot of other things. And we should learn the lessons of other states who got too involved. Again, keep your bureaucracy and your centralization not too much, just enough to make sure that you don't have bad dealers in it. No pun intended, but people who rip you off or not sell you what you want. But it should happen. And I've seen more and more people who I never thought would agree that at least medical marijuana or marijuana legalization should happen. The General Assembly is usually 10 years behind the public. They need to catch up and not have to worry about this anymore. Just do it.
Laura, Allie, any thoughts on legal pot?
I don't think we're going to see it legalized. It should be legalized. I mean, I think the Hoosier survey results, what was it, like 85%? I think that's the number I saw of people surveyed believe that it should be legalized. I mean, I completely agree with Mark. You legalize it, you tax it. We are losing out of millions of dollars to our neighboring states where marijuana is legal. And frankly, there's a lot of people from Indiana who are going over to those places to buy marijuana legally. Or to buy cannabis legally, and then are contributing to those local economies while they're there. So I just think, in the words of Mike Murphy, we're not going to see any movement on it until Indiana needs the money. So that's my take on it.
Allie, your thoughts real quickly.
I think we are going to see movement on the issue. I don't know if we'll see full decriminalization or legalization. I think we're going to see progress, though, on what a regulatory scheme would look like related to legalization. And I just love when we hear our Libertarian colleagues say, tax it. That should be a quote from this show. But yes, I do think that we'll see something come up in this session.
You're watching Indiana Issues. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. Now we come to the end of our program. We ask our pundits to look in their crystal balls and see what they can discern through the political ether. So, Mark, we'll start with you. What do you see? What do you see the next big issue going to be?
Oh, the next big issue. There are just some people who won't. I mean, abortions. The Libertarians, we've dealt with abortion by saying, government stay out of it. It's a personal decision. That we don't take a position one way or the other. We're split 50-50 on it. And the problem with abortion is that people are very strong and very split on it. I don't see how it doesn't get in the way of getting legislation done and getting other priorities done in the General Assembly. There's a lot of people who just really want to push it. So that's what I see what's happening. That's what I'm predicting, that it's going to be a mess and it's going to make people upset, and it doesn't matter who you are, you're going to get upset.
Laura?
I'm going to be pretty optimistic here, and I'm going to, maybe this is wishful thinking on my part, but I think we're going to start seeing Donald Trump fading away a little bit more so than in the past. I mean, he's out hawking NFTs and who knows what next. But I do think the Republicans are coming to their senses a little bit, and his days are numbered. Let's hope. So that's my crystal ball, and like I said, it's probably just wishful thinking on my part.
Allie?
I agree with Laura, but I also think from a state perspective, I've said it a couple times on this program, I'm going to say it again, it's going to be all about healthcare. I think there's going to be a lot of facets to that. It's healthcare costs. It's also going to be nursing and staffing shortages. I think you are just going to see that the General Assembly is really going to focus on this because they know that we can do better in Indiana, and they're going to try and help get us there during this legislative session. So if you're looking at it from a statewide perspective, I think that's what you're going to hear day in and day out when we enter the State House in January.
All right. Well, our guests on the program today have been Libertarian Mark Rutherford, Democrat Lara Beck, and Republican Allie Bartlett. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of Indian Politics Lore. Thank you all very, very much for being with us. We appreciate you. We appreciate all our friends here at the Edge Media Studios, and looking forward to seeing you guys again in 2023. Thank you, and happy holidays.